Good morning, everybody out there in webinar land. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to The Beacon. I am your host, Kevin Wilson, and I really appreciate you tuning in this morning. This is Dominion Payroll's ongoing webinar series where we bring you insights and perspectives from around the business community to help you navigate today's challenges and rise to meet them. From legislative updates and analysis to industry spotlights and sharing the stories of folks' entrepreneurial journeys that you may not hear otherwise, The Beacon is here for you every Wednesday at 11 a.m. I'm incredibly excited to welcome our panel this morning, but before I introduce them, just a few housekeeping measures. If you do have any questions for our guests today, please drop those in the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you avoid the chat. We do record these webinars so folks can review them later at their convenience, and the chat does not play nicely with our recording. So use that Q&A. As always, you can go to dominionpayroll.com and hit that COVID-19 resource button at the top of the homepage, and that'll take you to where you can register for all future webinars. You can view past recordings. You can also check out our whole resource page where we've got updates on the CARES Act, FFCRA, and all the other alphabet soup that we have grown to know and love over these last 8 months. So that is dominionpayroll.com, and just hit that COVID-19 resource button at the top of the page. Should you have any burning questions about payroll, recent legislation, or HR issues that occur to you in the middle of the night, please reach out to questions@dominionpayroll.com and we will take care of you. Now, on to today's topic, the tech revolution seemingly brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Not since the late 90s has there been such widespread hype and rapid adoption of new technology, from cloud computing and the Internet of Things, ed tech, communication advances, telemedicine, all the wearable technologies that we see everywhere. I know they're on my Christmas list. The last year has pushed tech forward by some estimates almost 5 years. While many of these technologies existed before the onslaught of the coronavirus, it's that widespread adoption, the weaving of these technologies into our everyday lives that happened while we were all stuck at home waiting on the next episode of Tiger King. Joining me today to discuss these changes is a fantastic panel. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists this morning. First up, we have Nick Serfass. He is the executive director of RVA Tech, the Richmond Technology Council. It's an association that's been around since 1989, and after several name changes here, it's RVA Tech. Nick has been heading this organization since January of 2019. And I'm just really excited to, sort of gain from your expertise and insight on tech companies sort of across the Central Virginia region. Nick, it's great to have you here. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Next up, we have Joe Belsterling, founder and CEO of Major Clarity. This organization helps K through 12 schools ensure that every student's outcome leads to successful career paths. It's a tech platform that allows folks to virtually explore the different dynamics of what a career looks like before necessarily going out there and getting into those fields. Recently, I've seen some awesome press that you guys have received around micro-credentialing. I'm really excited to learn about all that. Joe, thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, I'm going to go ahead and stick with you. I'd love it if you could, outside of my brief description of Major Clarity, tell us a little bit about where that idea came from, and what was your path to founding this company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I often say that the journey to Major Clarity was one of failure. So I basically failed at figuring out what I wanted to do in my life. And I say this as a joke because I come from a family of teachers, but there's that old saying of those who can do and those who can't teach. And so I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided, let me go try to help teach or coach other kids on what they want to do with their life. And that's a pretty high level summary, but that's really it in a nutshell. When I got to college, I ended up leaving my freshman year and worked for the Senate. And then I ended up working in finance, social work for a startup in business development, and doing a bunch of different stuff. And every time there were elements I enjoyed, but there were things that, let me know it wasn't going to be the necessarily perfect career path for me. And eventually I kind of just got to a point where I realized that it was really hard to test drive these career pathways. When I saved up and bought my first car, showed up to a dealership, got a free test drive. When I wanted to go to college, I showed up to a campus, got a free test drive, tour, meeting with admissions. When I was buying or renting an apartment in new cities, showed up to buildings, got tours, got a test drive. But when I wanted to get a career, it was, hey, choose a major, pay us 50 grand for a year of courses. And if you're lucky, go get an internship or a job afterwards, and then tell us if you like it or not. And so I ended up moving to New Orleans to just try to help other kids figure out what they wanted to do, seniors, juniors in high school, and even college freshmen, and would say, hey, what are you interested in? And then just tried to, find professionals, find industry vets, find activities that I could do with my peers to help them understand, do I actually want to do this or not? And the more I did that, the more I started to do some pattern recognition to identify ways to actually build content that, was answering 70 to 80% of the questions that the students were having, and therefore is a lot more scalable and on demand and accessible. And so one thing led to a next, and it kind of led me into becoming very, very passionate about building a college and career readiness solution for the K-12 industry.
I love it. And it just right off the bat, it absolutely resonates with me as someone who started studying aerospace engineering and tried on about 5 different majors in 3 different universities on 2 continents before ending with sociology. And what did I do with that? I opened a restaurant. So I think that I could have really benefited from Major Clarity back in the day. It sounds like an awesome platform and really a niche that needs to be served out there. Nick, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your path to RVA Tech. I looking over sort of your brief bio, I know going from bachelor's in foreign affairs to a master of architecture, maybe Major Clarity would have benefited you as well.
100%.
Tell us a little bit about how you ended up at RVA Tech.
Sure. Well, I'm an architect by background, technically. That's what I went to school for at the graduate level, and then actually practiced here in town for Baskerville for several years. But kind of quickly realized that I was better at other things beyond architecture than I was at architecture. So I really had a fascination for learning and for professional development. Really loved conferences and associations, and was really engaged in volunteering for my architecture association at the time. So that kind of led to a career transition into the association world back in 2008, which was a timely time to do that. The building industry was tanking a little bit, and kind of making a lateral turn into the association world was advantageous. Since then, I've worked for, this is the 3rd association I've worked for. I worked for a licensing body for the National Architecture Licensing Agency. And then I worked for a college student organization, which frankly, Joe, probably tried to accomplish a lot of the same things you're accomplishing, but in the architecture and design space. And then since then, I moved over to RVA Tech. I'm from Richmond, grew up here, been here since '88. And I just have a passion for technology and everything that's happening in that space. So it just made a lot of sense to make the move. So here I am today. With that said, like you mentioned, RVA Tech started back in '89. We kind of have 3 major premises. It's growing yourself, whether that is upskilling your talent, finding a new job, creating a bigger network, whatever it is that grows yourself within the industry. We try to help you with that. We also try to help you grow your business, whether that's creating a new network, doing business development, hiring talent. We try to provide opportunities like any trade association would. And then the last thing is growing the tech ecosystem here in RVA. And that ecosystem is broad, admittedly. It's colleges, it's startups, it's vendors and consultants, it's enterprise companies like Capital One, CarMax, Dominion. And what we try to do is just facilitate that ecosystem getting better and stronger throughout each year. So that's our mission.
I love that, and I think a valuable one. Given that startup space is just been growing by leaps and bounds, and I love seeing Startup VA and Activation Capital, and then the work that Lighthouse Labs does. It's a really cool time to be watching this growth happen right here in our backyard. So thank you for the services you provide to that ecosystem. Joe, I want to turn to you with sort of our first COVID-19 question. So many businesses found in March that they were restricted to a brick and mortar, that their business plan was, just punched in the side of the head, frankly, by lockdown orders and the practicality of being face to face with anybody safely. It seems like Major Clarity had a leg up in that it was already working towards a virtual platform. Something where students could interact with these things and figure out, career paths, test drive them, as you say. How has Major Clarity really reacted to the COVID-19? Has it been, has it been like a, oh my God moment? Or has it been a, oh wow, we really dodged a bullet, thank God we were virtual to start with? How have the last couple of months been for you?
I would say all of the above, oftentimes in the same exact day, as we've all definitely experienced. And so it's definitely been better for us than the majority. And that's the first thing I want to acknowledge is, we are very lucky and fortunate. We're a SaaS platform, we're virtual accessible, we're user friendly, we're in education, where, regardless of how much education is changing, education's not going anywhere. Our school systems aren't going to go bankrupt and just say, sorry, kids, like you're no longer going to get a high school diploma if you live in Richmond. So we're really fortunate and blessed in that regard. That said, though, it's definitely had its own challenges because education's never seen turmoil like it has in the last 6 months. And so to not be seen as spammy, to not be seen as an issue, to not lose traction there, whether it's just funding, time, bandwidth, etc., has definitely been a challenge. And when it first hit, March to April was a little scary. And in the back of my mind, I felt okay because I knew, hey, we're college and career readiness and career preparation, which is going to become even more important in tough economic times. We're a low-cost, affordable solution for districts, so we're not going to be the first up on the chopping block, and we're a virtually accessible platform. So those three tenets really gave me some confidence for our, substance and kind of our stability long term. But for that first 6 weeks, nobody was picking up the phone, nobody was emailing, nobody was doing anything because they were just in crisis mode, right? They were having to rebuild entire school districts in a matter of days in time for end of the year testing and assessments and all of these other things. And so you kind of do ask yourself, like, what happens if people just ignore us for the next 6 months? It's not a good thing. And so what I really tried to just preach to our team, and I think is valid for almost any business, but again, I'm acknowledging that we have a lot of benefits that maybe a restaurant or a shoe store or things like that don't have, is in tough times, things that are valuable become more valuable and things that are not valuable become less valuable. So it's really an absolute value amplification, right? It's really going to identify, are you valuable or are you not? And what I said to my team was, hey, look, I'm understanding that we're in more challenging times. I'm understanding that this is a more difficult work environment than we've ever had before. I'm understanding of the fact that there are social pressures and issues going on, and we have a very, very diverse company. And so I'm understanding that there are a lot of these things I can't understand. And we are going to be as absolutely empathetic to all of that as possible. However, all of that said, not delivering results isn't justifiable because all it means is our partners don't see us as valuable enough. If our partners really see their customer success manager as a true thought leader, that's the first person they're calling when life gets crazy because they need their advice, they need their input, they need their wisdom. And so I think it was a really good test moment for us because we did have that month of like, what's going to happen? And our team was scared and worried and people weren't really picking up the phone. And we really had to double down on putting out valuable content. I think up until now, we maybe took for granted our content marketing and our content engine because we had great relationships and good growth and good customer success. And, we started doing our own webinar series for education. The first couple had 20, 30 people tune in, but the last 3 in a row have had literally several hundred districts from across the country tuning in for us telling them how to navigate college and career readiness in virtual learning environments. And so I think our team really stepped up to the challenge. I mean, they do all the work. I joke that at this point, I have the easiest job, right? It's all of them doing the hard stuff. But, and so I'm incredibly proud of them, and I'm not taking any credit for the work they did because they stepped up to the plate. But I really just tried to make sure that we were staying focused on that message of, in times of trouble, if things are valuable, they become more valuable. And if we're really a trusted partner to our clients, they're going to be turning to us to help them navigate through this instead of ignoring our calls or ignoring our emails. And once kind of we established that we had a culture of empathy, but for our team and for results, but not excuses. And people realized, hey, like, no excuses. We got to step up, and this is our company, and we have to make it happen. We've pretty much beat all of our OKRs besides a couple every quarter since then for the last 3 quarters. And so the team's really done an incredible job. But I would say the biggest change for us is we really had to double and triple down on content marketing and really, even more so than we maybe felt comfortable, open up a lot of our proprietary insights around, we've learned a lot around how to engage students with virtual content and how to get the best results and what to do. And some of that was our proprietary edge, but we made the decision, hey, the industry needs this knowledge right now. And so even if our competitors are able to take it, you know what, we just got to put it out and trust that it's going to build that goodwill. And the results have really, really been encouraging from us really trying to put out a lot of that content leadership and thought leadership.
Love it. Well, and congratulations, first off, on continuing to navigate it and to bring that value. Nick, I saw you nodding your head there in agreement.
Yeah.
That content piece, that really, just bringing that value to your client, to your community. What are you seeing with your association members? How are they navigating this? I'm sure each business has a unique story, but I think there's some common themes here. What's it like out there for your members?
Yeah, what's been interesting to see is that prior to COVID, almost every organization or company had a strategy or a strategic plan or what they thought they were going to do in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And what we saw during COVID was essentially strategy just going out the window and people saying, okay, who is my customer and what does that customer need? End of story. And so whatever you thought your 5-year plan was going to be, just change to what's our 5-month plan? What's our 5-day plan, frankly, because the information keeps changing. And I think Joe hit it on the head. Once you realize what we were going through, that we're going through this unprecedented situation, well, okay, how do we stay relevant and how do we just give more than we get? Because people aren't necessarily picking up the phone right now, and people aren't necessarily buying. People don't know what their budgets are. But how do you still give value? So you create content, you create free products, you create free services, and you use this time to develop relationships. So I think it's interesting. We're talking around technology here, that this webinar is focused on technology, but yet I think at the end of the day, what we're all learning through COVID is that it's actually most important to build relationships. And if we've built strong relationships, then we're going to have value beyond this year, and we're going to have business beyond this year. Just to get into some of the tactical things, we did a lot of the same things Joe did, webinars, video content, just getting out there and being seen. And there was a moment at which I told my team at some point, we were evaluating the pros and cons of going with a particular initiative. And I was like, the success or failure of this initiative does not matter right now. What matters is that we're taking an initiative. We're doing something, because right now everybody's sitting at home. So as long as somebody sees that we're doing things and we're trying things and we're experimenting and we're testing and we're out there, whether it's successful or not doesn't matter. Because really, what is a success metric during a pandemic? None of us know, and we probably won't know for 10 years. So it comes back to relevance, creating relationships, and giving more than you get. And I boiled our strategy down to 3 things: do more things for more people and say more about it. So do more, for more, say more. That's it. It's not more complicated than that.
And
Love that.
Kevin, if I can jump in there, because I love what Nick said, because one of the things we tried to talk a lot about is, I think this matters anyway, but in a time like this, it becomes even that much more amplified, which is, I love the quote of have strong opinions that you hold loosely. And a lot of really smart people will talk about, like, I have such strong opinions, but as soon as you prove me wrong, I let it go and I move on, right? There's no pride, there's no ego, there's no sunk cost attachment. And that's really, I think, what Nick was describing in leading their team on. Who cares if this fails, right? Like, hold strong opinions, have high conviction, but hold it loosely. And as soon as it doesn't work, we move on to the next. Because I often see our team struggle with feeling like, well, we just put all this work into it and now we're just shutting down that initiative and it's a wasted effort. And although that might be a valid argument for most times, it's exactly what Nick said and what I told our team. We have no idea how to add value or get through to our users right now because what we've done for the last 3 years isn't working. So you need to be totally okay spending 2 12-hour days back to back to put together a new virtual website, and then we're going to spin it up and use it. And then next week we're going to say, nope, that failed. We're throwing it away and we're moving on to the next thing. But what dictates our success is not going to be our hit rate. It's going to be how quickly we iterate. And it's not going to be whether or not the first thing we do is right. It's going to be how quickly we iterate to find what actually works. And I could see sometimes our team getting frustrated doing so many things that felt sporadic in the early days. But that first month or 6 weeks, we identified what worked and what didn't by basically wasting 2/3 of our time doing things that didn't work. And then for the last 6 months, we've been able to only focus on the things that have worked, and the dividends have just been really, really incredible.
I really appreciate both of your comments in that area. I know in early days, I heard the phrase, you get the choice to innovate or hibernate. And I really pushed against that. Where it was like, this isn't a thing that'll be over by spring break. This is a global pandemic, and we're not really sure where that the idea of just keeping your powder dry and sitting still didn't really seem like the way forward, frankly. And the businesses that I saw, whether they were restaurants or retail that were particularly hard hit by all of this, but the ones that were, like you said, sort of throwing everything against the wall, seeing what sticks, getting rid of what doesn't work, that there was success to be had in that. There was opportunity in the chaos. So I very much appreciate that. I want to turn to sort of a comparative period, in relatively recent history, just in terms of technology and widespread adoption. We know that in the late 90s, you could put a .com on the end of just about anything, and some VC guy would crawl out of the woodwork and offer you $1 million. And we know how that story ended with a bubble bursting in the market and dogfood.com going belly up and but I think at the time everybody was like, this is Star Trek. This is the future. Like, it's here. We're gonna fly in cars and jetpacks before you know it. And it didn't really bear out. And I from my perspective, I think that there's been a sort of a 2-decade learning curve, figuring out what does work and figuring out the intersection of all these different technologies and really how they work in our human lives. And I really feel that in the last 8 months, we may have seen more widespread adoption of, the normalizing of webinar phone calls like this, telemedicine. I've done that for the first time, in my adult life. And I'm curious, what are both of your perspectives on this period of human history? What do you think the story is going to be like when we look back from 5 or 10 years? To this widespread adoption? I mean, Joe, do you feel like you sort of caught a comet by the tail and you're right place, right time? Just sort of given the whole ecosystem and the environment. And then Nick, I'll pose the same sort of question to you.
Yeah, so I actually don't. We're kind of in a very interesting place. And I'm not saying I don't feel that way about the industry. I'm just talking about Major Clarity, where I've even talked to a couple of my good friends in VC who see a ton of companies, have big portfolios, et cetera. And we're kind of in this very weird place where the pandemic hasn't been a big pro or con to us. So what I've heard from most is 5% of businesses have just seen 1,000% growth rates, and it's just been insane. And then 95% of businesses have been crushed. And like I said, we've been beating our quarterly numbers, but it's been by like 5 to 10%, like nothing in, because what helped us was also offset by things that hurt us. And so net, we're kind of just operating pretty closely to where we thought we would be projection and strategic plan wise before the pandemic. We're spending a little bit less money, and we've been able to kind of beat numbers that way. We're getting a little better results because the content marketing's been more effective than we expected. But we also lost the in-person conferences and the in-person sales trips. And so there's kind of been a lot of offsets. So it's not really been this huge boom or bust. I mean, our company's doing very well, but we were doing well pre-pandemic. And it's not like now we're doing twice as well, or now we're doing half as well. We're kind of just doing a little bit better. So we really haven't seen a huge impact like that. What I will say is, I think just overall, there's been a forced adoption to a lot of the points you made, right? Like you look at e-commerce, you look at virtual tools and virtual job readiness, you look at virtual culture. There's just been a forced adoption with a lot of these different things. My personal take on this, and who knows, take this with a grain of salt, is most of this is going to end up leading to some sort of hybrid models, right? I'm a big believer, and even if you look at history, people never stay, like life is always a pendulum. Things always go through swings. And, you know, people always think, oh, this is going to impact us forever. Outside of maybe the Great Depression, where you look at that generation and they really changed their lifestyle habits for their entire life. Like you look at like SARS, this, that, 2 years later, we're back to normal. We're back to acting like it never happened. I don't think this is just going to completely be erased from our mind. But I've had a lot of talks of like people think, oh, our generation's going to forever be changed. I think people are much more short-sighted than that most of the time. So like personally for us, what's happened is we were an in-person company. Our software engineering team, which is sometimes tougher to recruit in Richmond, is all US based, but it is remote and distributed. But our sales and customer success operations are all in our centralized office. And we've seen that we've had a lot of success virtually. That said, there's things we miss about being in person. So post-pandemic, 2 years from now, do I see us being more open and more accessible with virtual working and people working from home more frequently than maybe just Friday afternoons? Absolutely. Do I see us saying, great, we're never going to want an office again and we're a fully distributed company? No. And you definitely have companies on both sides of the aisle, but I would say the vast majority of executives I've talked to have kind of come down somewhere in the same ballpark. Like, hey, this is working a little better than we thought. We're more open to this. But like I said, things usually never end up being black or white. You know, it's always a pendulum. And so I think we're going to settle when the dust settles, we're going to end up seeing a lot more hybrid models where people are taking, and I've heard this from schools, right? They're saying, hey, look, we shouldn't view this as great. Now we just have to do virtual learning and then just go back to in-person learning. We should view this as, what about virtual learning actually worked better than in-person learning? And what about virtual learning isn't working as well as in-person learning? And when this subsides, when we get back to normal, how can we then create a hybrid model that pulls the best of both worlds into a new learning model? And I think that's what we're going to try to do as a company. And I think that's what most tech companies will do as well.
I do think that the word of 2021 is going to be hybrid. I'm calling it here and now. And to sort of speak to your point, I remember after the tragic events of 9/11, every talking head said that business travel was over forever. We'd never get on airplanes the same way. And obviously we've adapted, and, you know, up until recently, travel looked pretty much the same, you know. That everybody needs to write an article, everybody needs to get their 15 seconds. And so I think it's easier to go to extremes and be like, we'll all live in, you know, bunkers and only talk on iPads from here on out. Nick, I'm curious, you know, as you look across your membership, you know, where are the where are your company seeing the success, and you know, how has the navigating of all this been for them?
Yeah, there's several different areas where I want to touch on in terms of what our companies do and how they're reacting here. But I want to take a step back and, first of all, everything Joe just said plus one to that. And I keep hearing this hybrid word, like it's something different or new that we all have to get used to. And I actually sometimes when I hear that, I flip hybrid for just the middle, meaning, like Joe said, we're not, other than elections, apparently, we're not as polarized as we all think we are, according to the media. I feel like most Americans are actually somewhere in the middle, and reality is always somewhere in the middle. When we started this pandemic, some folks thought it was just a 2-week quarantine and shutdown and we'd be back to normal. There was going to be a threshold, which we turned the lights back on. Some folks have talked about, well, it's going to be 2022 or beyond before companies go back together. And the reality is just always in the middle. And I feel like, outside of election years, Americans think mostly in the middle and are mostly moderate. And as business owners, we're all taking the pros and cons of both sides and trying to figure out the best path forward. So, this big extreme change, it's like what Joe just said. You're taking the best things we learned from COVID, we're going to apply them to life, and we're going to move forward. But we're not going to be, in quarantine anymore, and we're not going to be, shut down. So it's just the middle. And I want to go back to the original part of the question, the .com bust, Kevin, and because I love when people bring that up, because I'm like, it's really not an internet bust. I keep telling people for 20 years, I've been telling people, I think this internet thing is for real. I think it's going to stick around. I mean, I don't think the .com busted. I think humans busted, or I think products busted. Like you said, pets.com didn't work, and people put money into companies that didn't have any value. But the internet, last time I checked, pretty much here to stay, and probably bigger than it was in 2000. So I like to talk about, systems. So there's infrastructure, there's processes, there's information, and all of these things evolve over time since, the dawn of human history. So yeah, products bust, the Segway isn't what we thought it might be. And, there's a couple other, products out there that didn't make the cut, but the systems of infrastructure, process, and information will always continue to iterate. So if you invest in that or build a company around that, or something that advances those 3 things, you're going to be fine. And going to where we left it off with, what are our companies doing? Where are they playing, and how are they seeing things? Well, so I'm seeing pretty much 5 different categories. There's data that's happening right now everywhere. Companies are starting data, or people are starting data companies. Companies are starting data departments, and people are just going into data as a career. The funny thing about data is what we've learned over the last 8-9 months is that the data doesn't really say anything. Humans say things, media says things, social media says things, we interpret things, but data is just numbers. And you could really take that data in so many different ways. So I really feel like there's a boom of business analytics that's going to happen in the next year or two, where people are saying, yeah, we can not only pull your data, but we can interpret it for you. Because data tells a story, and it's what story you want to tell. It's not necessarily what the numbers, say, more or less, but you can twist that in any way that works for your business. The second area is cybersecurity and information security. I hear this all the time. You need to invest in cyber. You need to invest in IS. Well, it's not really cyber. It depends on your company. What it is risk management. There's all kinds of bad people out there and bad things that can happen. But how much do you want to invest in protecting against it? And what's the risk if something does go wrong? For some companies, it may not be a big risk, so you don't have to invest heavily in cyber. For other companies, it may be a bigger investment. So I think it's not just cyber, it's risk management that's gonna boom here in the next year or two. The third one is the cloud. Everybody's talking about the cloud and what is your business strategy to the cloud, whether you are 2 people or 2,000 people. And there's a bunch of different ways to the cloud, and a lot of RVATECH members are consultants to that, or trying to figure it out themselves and trying to figure out what the best way into the cloud or through the cloud or back out of the cloud, whatever it might be. But the funny thing about the cloud to me is the UX side of it, meaning you can build systems in the cloud and processes in the cloud, but how are your employees going to use it? And how are your customers going to use it? If it doesn't have a great UX, then who cares where your data is, if it's on-prem or if it's in the cloud? You got to be able to use it and to have all your services be accessible by your employees and by your customers. So I think there's a UX side to cloud that's going to grow in the next couple of years. The other two, which are kind of combined, is video and communications. Joe mentioned it with webinars and things like that, and content production. better quality video and better video production, not just putting something haphazardly together, I think is going to be more important than ever before. We learned a lot of lessons from that I'll talk about later. Over the last 8 months, we failed miserably early on in the video space, and now I think we're figuring it out. Similarly, communications. How are you communicating with your members or your customers or your audience? And what platforms do you use to make that communication happen? And there's so much out there. In fact, communication is so fragmented now. There's 8 different legitimate social media platforms, and not just 2. And then there's internal communications, and how do you maximize all of that? So I think that's important as well. And I'll dive deeper as we go on.
Love it. Well, and I think if there really is a red thread through all of that, it's that, these are all tools in human hands, and that human component is really crucial. And that really, shapes how these technologies will flourish in the coming years. One question that, or I guess one area that always comes up when you start talking about tech, it's Silicon Valley, it's the monstrous companies that have come to sort of dominate our economy in recent years. I'm curious, both of your perspectives. I mean, Joe, as the CEO and founder of a startup, we've witnessed Amazon and Facebook and Google gobble up companies in their infancy. And I'm curious if, do you think that there is there a future for the so-called Kingslayers, or is there space in the market for a Major Clarity to exist next to an Amazon? How vibrant is the economy right now?
Yeah, so I will say this is my one claim to fame for financial advice. Like, this was like 8 years ago or so. And so I'm not just getting on the train now. And I was like, man, if I wasn't starting a company and I was making a salary, because my first year was starting Major Clarity, I made like $9,000. So I had no money to live off of, much less invest. I was like, I wouldn't even do a 401k. I like tweeted it out. I was like, I would take every dollar I have and just put it into Amazon, and I would just hold. And when I wanted to sell, I would just hold more. I think Amazon is going to be a case study for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. And I don't want to be I hate when people are too fanboy, because nothing's perfect, nothing's imperfect, right? Like Nick said, things are always in the middle. But what's really amazing to me is how in many ways they've seemingly avoided so many of the stagnations that happen when you reach that scale. And, we talk about them next to the Google or the Facebook, but it's not even comparable. And here's why. Google has 100,000 employees. For the last 4 months, Amazon has been adding 100,000 employees per month. And now, granted, this is a lot of logistics workers, warehouse workers, so it's not getting paid the same as a software developer. But still, when you look at that level of a scale, people forget that, and they often look at those companies as synonymous. Amazon is literally adding the size of a Google on a per month basis at this point, and they're still not stagnating. And there was an amazing case study written about their acquisition of Whole Foods, and how the Whole Foods acquisition was actually the same exact business model as what they did with AWS, even though it's completely different spaces, where they basically identify what their existing business would be the largest customer for. So for instance, they ran the largest online commerce and bookstore site. So they were the largest customer for a hosting site in the world. So then they can go incubate a world-class hosting business, AWS, because even if they can't sell it to anyone else, they have an insurance policy of, they know they're the largest customer in the world for that anyway. So they're going to be driving the creation of that. And then when they launched the Amazon food delivery and all of those things, Whole Foods they were now the largest customer of Whole Foods, because they were buying all the groceries for their Amazon delivery services from Whole Foods. So the floor on these types of innovations and acquisitions is so much higher, because they're already a multi-billion-dollar customer for that client. And so it's like the worst case scenario is Whole Foods sells $10 billion a year of groceries to Amazon for Amazon's grocery delivery service. And so I think what they've been able to do at their level of scale is really just mind-blowing. And I would, if you said, what's one company you don't want to compete with, 10 out of 10 times I'm saying Amazon. And you even see a lot of the strain of bigger companies at the Googles. If you look at the Google headlines for the last 2 years, what has Sundar Pichai been dealing with? HR issues, employee revolting issues, culture issue. Like it's not the Google of 5 years ago. It's not even the Google of 3 years ago, where it's, the founders, Sergey and Larry, talking about Google X and space shots and moonshots. Like Sundar was named CEO because they're a different company now. And the fact that Amazon's been able to avoid a lot of those pitfalls that these larger companies hit. And I think Google's finally, it's caught up to them a little bit in the last year or two. And yes, I mean, because of the pandemic, their share price is still going up and they're looking great. But if you I think writing on the wall, I don't think Google's going to be Google in 10 to 15 years. And maybe that's a contrarian take. Whereas I don't see anything that's starting to slow down Amazon, which is really just mind numbing at the scale they've achieved. But that said, I think there's always room for new businesses and new challengers. My chairman was the CEO of a near $1 billion company in our space. And we often talk about how hard it is to maintain a culture of innovation once you hit that scale. Because the simple truth of the matter is everything is in business is percentage based, right? And so if you're doing 100 million a year, if you're doing $1 billion a year in revenue, and you identify an opportunity, if that opportunity can't be 8-9 figures of revenue in the next 2 to 3 years, you're not going to be able to pursue that because it's not meaningful enough. But that means all of these other challengers are going to be able to execute on that when it's so small and nascent, it's not relevant to you, but it's relevant to them. And then they're going to be able to start to attack your business from all of these niche standpoints. And so to be able to fend that off at scale while staying innovative and also growing on a percentile basis is, in my mind, one of the hardest things. And we're tiny, we're doing a couple million and we're 30 plus employees, but already my COO and I have regular conversations about what are we going to do once we start crossing those 8-figure thresholds. And then once we start aiming for 9 figures, to make sure we're not getting displaced, because we can no longer pursue the level of nicheness that the next startup can. And that's going to give them a path to attack and pull from our business. And I think it's tough and there's no silver bullet. But that's just kind of my general perception on the market. You see it with Facebook. Like I said, I think you're already starting to see it with Google. I'm still in awe that I don't think you're starting to see it yet with Amazon. And I'm wondering if it's going to come or if they're just going to be able to continue to execute at the level that they have.
A really fascinating perspective there. And I hadn't really considered it from that angle, where I think for, a lot of us, maybe perhaps lay people, it just seems like, oh, we've got these behemoths and they can just buy companies willy-nilly. And sometimes people are creating companies with the express purpose of just being acquired. But that idea that, an Amazon can't necessarily deploy the resources to focus on a niche, but somebody in a smaller market can say, hey, that's a golden egg for me. That's a really interesting look at that. Nick, I want to hear your thoughts on the health of competition in the marketplace and where, all of your startups, where do they sit and as they look out at a really varied playing field?
Yeah, it's a good question. So not a lot of our members are quote unquote startups, as you would see like, at 1717 or somewhere like that. But we do have a ton of small businesses. And what I would say is that, the success of a business isn't necessarily getting into the FANG category. I mean, FANG is only 5 companies out of, the millions that are out there. There's nothing wrong or bad about having a company that makes a couple $1 million a year or a couple $100 million a year. I mean, that either way, that could be a great business. And that's where a lot of our members sit. They're creating great businesses. They've identified real problems. They're solving those problems. And, they've hired a great workforce. They're creating jobs. They're helping the ecosystem. And, maybe we'll get a FANG in Richmond one day, maybe not. But, if we have a bunch of other companies that are just doing great work and creating solid companies, well, there's nothing wrong with that either. And I do think FANG will miss something one day. I mean, if you look at other areas that have missed, I mean, Blockbuster wasn't trying not to innovate when Netflix came along. They just missed the threshold. They didn't invest when they thought it wasn't going to happen. So at some point, the threshold changes where you look at a company and you say, oh, they can't compete. And then before you know it, they can compete and their brand is beyond where you can acquire them. So I do think at some point, we'll either transition out of those services or another service will become popular or they'll just miss something. So I do think there are opportunities. And if there weren't, then we wouldn't have as many startups as there are, not only in Richmond, but in every, other major city and area around the country. So, there's always opportunities. I also want to just highlight that society changes. Everything that we do changes over time. So while there may not seem like there's an opportunity right now, 2 years from now, there may be, and 3 years from now, there may be. And this pandemic has probably created a ton of opportunities that we just haven't identified yet. I mean, just take a look at Zoom. I mean, that's a company that, 10 months, 11 months ago was great, but we weren't really heavily invested in. And now they've come on the scene and they've taken advantage of an opportunity here in time and the way that, our society has changed and they're capitalizing on it. So other things like that may happen. It may not be a global pandemic, but there may be other nuanced changes in how we operate and how we behave that create opportunities. So I assume FANG will either expand or contract in some way, but it'll definitely change.
I do think that it's pretty wild that that Zoom went from being a video hosting platform that we were all vaguely aware, but it was utilitarian. It was a thing where I give me Skype, give me FaceTime, whatever. It's all sort of the same to me. And now I'm hearing people talk about Zoomers as the name of the next generation. I mean, just the way that that nomenclature can flip over, and it's like, I mean, talk about just grabbing hold of the zeitgeist for a moment. Joe, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the micro-credentialing that Major Clarity has been doing. And it was a bit of a turn in the conversation, but I think that the work that y'all are doing is really cool. And we spent a lot of time talking about sort of big market level stuff in the world. And I'd really like to learn a little bit more about what Major Clarity is doing and how you're meeting students where they are and yeah,
absolutely. And on that note, I think what we're doing here, and in many ways it's getting presented as kind of phase 2, but it's really not. It's just a continuation of what we've always been doing. And so even as I shared in my own personal journey, we've always identified and felt like the level of jump that happens in college and career readiness is not really comparable to the level of jump that happens anywhere else in life. We really focus on building age-appropriate levels of sequences for people to do things, right? Like you don't go from like reading about a car to buying a car. You get to test drive, you get to do this, and you don't buy the most expensive car, your first car. You probably buy a lemon, that's used and it's your buddy's for $800 or whatever it is. But with that college and career readiness, it goes from like, hey, you're in high school, you're doing these things, take an assessment. All right, now spend $20,000 a year, now spend $50,000 a year. And so for us, we've always really focused on how do we build more age-appropriate sequential steps to identifying what they want to do. And that first step was exploratory content. It was Q&A videos. It was interactive simulation activities that students can do in 15 to 20 minutes say, do I think I would actually like doing this job? But what's not being answered by that is, would I like learning about this job? And so that's really two distinct questions, but they're really part of the same exact process. Because the example that's easiest to share and people to understand is, look at being a doctor. You might have a kid who is like, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor, I love diagnosing people, I love helping people, let's do it. But they hate reading, they hate vocab, they hate memorization. And it's like, you can want to be a doctor and love the job of being a doctor all day long. But if you can't get through 7 years of med school, it doesn't matter. Like, you're never going to be able to be a doctor. And so the micro-credentials is really the natural continuation of the exploratory content we started building. And I think what's really cool is, we've now served close to 1 million kids. We have over 1 million kids under contract, and we've been doing it for years. So we're actually able to start showing the data that is saying our approach is more effective than what students have been doing. And we knew this would be true because kids only retain 10% of what they read, but everything we give them to learn about jobs and personalities is text-based assessments and text-based descriptions. And so we really were like, that's not going to be effective. And we've actually just recently identified in a group of 2,000 students they were 189% more likely to select a career-aligned course plan of study, meaning leading towards what career they ended up wanting to do, if they had completed one of our test drives. And so that was really that initial threshold to get that engagement and that buy-in. And now these micro-credentials are allowing us to help them identify, okay, I like the idea of this job, but will I like learning about this job? Will I like actually building these skills and these competencies? And the most beautiful part of it is it's actually tremendously valuable to the kid, not just for the content, but that's something that they can extrinsically share on a resume, on a college application, et cetera, because every college and every employer I've talked to has said, wow, if you showed me a high school kid sat down and did 5 hours of competency-based content that was endorsed by a leading industry partner, whether it's a college or an employer, a Fortune 500, that would, in my mind, automatically pre-qualify that student because it's showing initiative, commitment, passion, and that they've already experienced the content enough to know if it's worth pursuing more. And so it's not just helping the kid intrinsically, but it's actually also giving themselves or them something to stand out better and better prepare themselves for success down the line and better pre-qualify them for those college and job opportunities that are going to arise after they graduate high school.
Love it. Yeah, that is really, I'm honestly, I'm just sort of thinking of my education experience and how valuable your programming would have really been. Nick, I'd like to turn to you. And I also want to be respectful of everybody's time as we get closer to the noon hour here. One thing that I always love to sort of, end on is sort of just a positive note. And, I think that we'll all have the opportunity 5 years from now to, tell our pandemic story, to say, hey, this is what I was doing, or this is something that over that, that year-long period, this really stood out to me. And I think that, Nick, you're uniquely positioned dealing with all these small businesses and these growing enterprises. They've all been met with challenges, and I'm sure that through interacting with them, trying to serve them and help them survive all of this, I can only imagine there've been some standout moments. And I hope I'm not putting you too much on the spot to recollect one or two of those. But what's sort of part of your pandemic story?
Yeah, I know. I mentioned early on we learned some things about video, and we had some failures that now we're seeing as successes. And early on, it was maybe May, June, we invested in some video content and video products and services that really maybe we didn't do well. Maybe the services weren't what we expected, and really the impact wasn't what we intended. But we learned some things from those, and we put out some video products recently. We did an entire awards gala. We have a tech awards program here. That's usually a big gala. It's at the convention center. It's 1,000 people in a convention room with tables and dinners. And we weren't able to do that this year, obviously. But we ended up putting a production together. It was about an hour and 15 minutes where we had a film company actually do the awards like you would do the Oscars or the Academy Awards or something like that. So we did this film production where the actual night of, we just pressed play via Zoom or via Facebook, and we played the video. And when we were creating it and coming up with the idea, I had kind of a pain in my soul about the fact that all of our award winners for this year wouldn't be acknowledged to the degree that they would in a normal year. They wouldn't be on stage. They wouldn't have the recognition and the congratulations and all, and the round of applause and all that good stuff. But what we found is we created the video, and then we were able to chop it up afterward and distribute it all over social media and do all of these things. And then other people started picking it up. So the places where people went to school, started picking up that content, or their companies picked up that content, and it started getting shared and distributed all around. And I've had a couple of the award winners say that, gosh, they've had more engagement, this year because of that social media video element than they probably would have in a normal year. So they really appreciated it. So that was kind of a positive note where we didn't expect, something to really have a greater impact than the real thing would have. So that's my positive note from 2020.
I love that, and I love the sort of the experimentation and the working with the resources you have. All businesses are maybe we can sit down and we can strategize, but until you're actually doing it, you don't really know what that kernel is what's going to resonate. So that's a really cool lesson to learn out of that. Joe, I'd like to turn to you and think about, as Major Clarity is growing, are there any lessons or sort of operating things that you're now doing on a daily basis that you think will exist with Major Clarity and outlive the pandemic? Any changes that you've had or any positive experiences where you're like, man, honestly, this was sort of a windfall for us. Joe, I think we've got you on mute.
Yep, sorry, I was on mute. I had a truck driving by our office when Nick was talking and didn't want to distract. I would say the biggest one really happened as soon as the pandemic hit. And it was a really good eye-opening lesson for me as a leader, because a lot of my mentors and my closest mentors is often reminding me of the need in leadership to repeat, support, and see through. Right? It's like leadership isn't just telling somebody to do something one time. It's making sure they understand why it's so important, making sure you're constantly reminding them that it's important, helping them understand how to accomplish it, and then helping it make sure it's seen through. And that level of focus and attention is critical. And when the pandemic hit, we immediately went virtual overnight. Not what we were providing, that was already virtual, but just as an office. And Lauren, my COO, and I really quickly realized that we had taken a lot of the benefits of being in person for granted, because there wasn't nearly as much vision alignment and focus alignment with our company and what actually moved the needle for us as we thought there was. But we kind of were able to make up for that because we were always in person and they were always able to swing by my desk or Lauren's desk, or we were able to hear what they were working on or see what they were working on. And so to get a little more tangible, we often talk about, we're a startup, 80-20 rule. We have to always focus on the 20% of work that moves the needle 80%, like highest and best use of our time. And when we went virtual, we saw that there was a greater lack of alignment to that than we would have otherwise expected. And so we always have like OKRs and KPIs and things like that, but it's kind of stuff we've just used internally. And one of our first pivots was we created a Google Doc version of our OKR dashboard. And we have three kind of department groupings of our company, and each one has about 4 or 5 OKRs. And we've just been religious about making sure that every week we publicly review that with our entire company. And we tell people, if you can't point to something out of these 12 priorities that the work you're doing right now is going to move the needle on, you're not allowed to do that thing. And so I think we kind of just took for granted the focus we had from being together in a shared space. And as soon as we went remote, we realized that Lauren and I weren't doing a good enough job of making sure people understood what is the highest and best use of my time and what do I need to be focused on moving the needle. And it really allowed us to build a better culture around that. And I think that's something we're really grateful for. And I think that's part of what's helped us yield higher results in execution, is because we've adopted a much more concrete focus on, these are the 10 things total company wide for our thousands of schools. These are the only 10 things we can focus on moving the needle on right now. Doesn't matter who you are. And I think that's been really beneficial and is something we're definitely going to hold on to indefinitely.
I think that's a really great note to sort of wind down our conversation today. And that alignment between what you're practically doing on a day-to-day basis, hour by hour, and what are our priorities, what are our goals. I think a lot of companies are struggling with that. So yeah, I appreciate. Frankly, I appreciate the sort of the humble take on that and saying, hey, maybe we were taking it. Advantage of the in-person thing, but writing this stuff down and being intentional about it is going to be crucial for Major Clarity moving forward. So thank you very much for that insight. And thank you for being here today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks,
Nick, for participating. I loved so much of what you had to say. Kevin, thanks for having us and having me and for the opportunity. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their Wednesday and week.
Absolutely. Joe, real quick, tell people, how can they connect with Major Clarity?
MajorClarity.com. Our team is active on LinkedIn. We're active on Twitter @Major Clarity. And so, feel free to check us out, follow us on social media. hit us up if you want your school to use. We're serving about 60% of districts in Virginia, so we're doing pretty well here. But in case your district or kid's school is not one of them, let's bring it to them. And so hit us up, reach out, follow us on social. We'd love to engage with you.
Love it. Nick, I have, it's really been an honor having you here today. Thank you for taking the time, and really the insights that both of you guys brought today were awesome. And I know that our audience really gained from that. Nick, tell folks, how can they connect with RVA Tech?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it. RVATech.com is our website, and we're on all the socials as well. And Joe, it was great to be here with you too. You know, I may actually be a client of yours. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So looking forward to learning more about Major Clarity.
I'm still trying to figure it out too. So
Awesome. I
Awesome.
love it, guys.
There you go.
Thank you so much. We do appreciate you, you guys being here, and to our audience, thank you all very much for taking the time today. I hope that you found this conversation as fascinating as I did. My name is Kevin Wilson, and this has been The Beacon, coming to you every Wednesday at 11 a.m. from the Dominion Payroll Home Studios. Please, if you have not registered yet and you are a client or you are curious about Dominion Payroll, come out tomorrow morning, 9 to 12. We have our year-end seminar. This is going to be a great virtual event where we're going to bring you all the tools and guidance that you need to get through year end. It's going to be everything from ACA compliance, working with open enrollment and benefits administration, looking at doing bonus payrolls, the tax implications of this wild year, and some overview on some of the changes that have come out of the legislature, taking a look at CARES Act and EIDL loans and PPP loans and all of that good stuff. And also a couple lessons on cybersecurity. So it's a packed event. It's totally free. Go to dominionpayroll.com and hit that resource button at the top of the homepage. You'll be able to register right there. Do hope to see you there. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time and joining us today. I'm Kevin Wilson. This has been The Beacon. Hope everybody has a great Wednesday. And as always, please don't forget to wash your hands. Have a great day, everybody.